You've heard AM, you've heard FM. Now, tune into DM Radio, the world's longest running show about data. Each week, host Eric Kavanagh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on a show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanagh here. And I'm very excited to talk about a hot topic in the world of data. It's all about data exchanges, moving data around or buying data, renting data, using data in responsible ways. We are, of course, in the information age. This is the information economy, and it runs on data. So we're going to talk about different ways to move data around and to share data, share and share alike. That's the topic today. It's a thing. So we're big on sharing data. And that's a really good trend in the marketplace, quite frankly, because a lot of times, historically, what have we done? We've basically created stovepipes. We've created silos of data within our organizations, and we don't even share them across the organization very well. So that's been a bit of a trend. Collaboration, of course, is a big deal these days. We're starting to see collaboration capabilities woven into a lot of these different platforms, which is fantastic news. Things like notes, things like lineage information, for example, such that someone who logs in and gets a set of data can very quickly ascertain what this data is, what it's to be used for, what it's not to be used for. Of course, we've got some regulations that are moving us in certain directions. The GDPR out of the European Union, of course, is a big deal. The General Data Protection Regulation. Here in the USA, you have the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, which in some ways is maybe even a bit more strenuous than GDPR. And they've tried in other states. In New York, they tried, it didn't work. But there are straws in the wind, to say the very least. This is the direction things are going. And we'll find out more from our guests today. So Michele Duigo is our first guest from a company called ProcureDo, dialing in all the way from Calgary. So Michele, welcome to DM Radio. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you folks are doing to enable responsible use of information assets.
You bet. Thanks, Eric. So yeah, I'm Michele from ProcureDo Business Solutions up here in Calgary, and I'm the VP of Operations. And we move data for our customers. So if we can pull data out of their system, whether it's via an API, web service, even an SQL query, and they want us to put it in another system, and as long as we have the ability to do that, we can move that data for them. So right now, a lot of our customers, it's B2B, and they're using their data in the procurement space. So creating purchase orders and sending those POs electronically to their vendors, doing goods receipts, advanced shipment notices, and eventually the invoicing as well too is all transmitted electronically. And we move all of that data for them within the specified formats that are required for everybody's systems as well too.
Yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. And the genesis of this company, did it come out of a need for security, for privacy, for governance, that kind of thing? Is that where the idea came from to take this approach?
The idea basically came from, I don't want to have to key in the same data over and over again. So that's what we're really aiming to do, is increase that efficiency for those office users. So instead of having to key in information into one system, turned around, key in the exact same information into another system, and then actually even key it into a third system. So we can take it from that original system and have it flow all the way through and hit all of those stops that it needs to. So yeah, basically we're trying to make everybody more efficient by moving their data and them not having to do it themselves.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So there's a mapping that you build out of where this information needs to go, and you have a centralized place for including or inputting the information, and then in a secure and privatized fashion, it is channeled out to the various places where it needs to go. That's pretty cool. How do you build these systems? Is that bespoke for each customer, or are there some basic templates that you use to get the ball rolling?
There's some basics, obviously, depending on where the information is coming from. That obviously is standard and where we're delivering it to. And also different companies have different formats. So there's PIDEX, so the Petroleum Industry Data Exchange. So that has to be in a certain format. And one of the vendor portals uses that as their method. So there's a lot of things that are definitely reusable, and we build upon that with the schemas. And then, of course, when we're sending to, a network portal, everybody behind that portal obviously has different requirements as well, too. So we get all of those mapping requirements. So a file will come into us in one specific format, and then we need to determine where it's going to and how we need to format that data to get it to where it needs to go to. So all behind the scenes, all that schema, all that mapping. And as soon as we get some data in, and by the time we send it out, it's only seconds. So yeah, it's pretty crazy what's going on behind the scenes.
Well, it's a very clever and very practical approach for enabling the sharing of data in a responsible way. We talk about this all the time, the critical nature of morale in organizations, and what leads to loss of morale is friction, is inefficiency, bad data, of course, bad processes. All of these things add up to create a culture of, unhappy people, I guess. And unhappy people tend to make mistakes, right? So the more you can streamline that process, the better off the employee is going to be. We talk about customer experience. Employee experience is really important too, and partner experience. Whoever is touching these processes, you want them to be doing so in an efficient and quick fashion. And that just, then you can focus on important things like, putting fires out or doing other stuff, right, Michele?
Yeah, exactly. And that's our main selling points. You got it right there, Eric. Increasing the proficiency, reducing errors, and getting people to be able to do more important things than key punching and data entry.
That's right. I remember data entry. Okay, I'm old enough to remember when data entry was like a whole job. It was a whole industry. That's what you did. Oh, I got a job doing data entry. Oh boy, does that sound fun? Clickety clack all day long. Yeah, you want to mitigate as much of that as possible. You want to get the important stuff, but do so in a responsible way. Cool. Very, very cool.
Exactly.
Well, let's bring in our second guest. We've gotten sticking around for the roundtables, Michele. We've got David Goodman from a company called iGrant.io. David, tell us a bit about yourself and what you're doing in the data sharing space.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I'm David. I work for this company, iGrant.io. I'm based in Scotland, but the company is based in Stockholm, Sweden, and it is 4 or 5 years old. And we are in the business of data sharing. And we have a data exchange platform which enables organizations to share verified personal and also non-personal data with other organizations. And one of the great things about being able to share about a data exchange is that you can aggregate data from multiple different sources. So if you just get data from one silo, from one source, you may not have everything that you need. You may not have all the attributes that you need to perform, for example, machine learning type activities for analysis. This is particularly true in the financial world and also in healthcare, where you want as big a data set as possible in order to get as wide a coverage of what is going on either in a financial market or in, say, the diagnostic of certain types of cancers, where you want to get not a specific demographic or a specific age group, but you want as wide as possible and be able to calibrate your algorithms accordingly. For that, you need data. One of the things that drives us, we also have available a data wallet, a DApp-based data wallet SDK.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah, this is interesting. So let's talk about DApps. This is a relatively new thing, folks. DApps, distributed apps, and it's a new approach to creating applications, and it's really geared largely around privacy, right?
Yeah. So you were asking Michele about the genesis of her company. Where our company came from initially was around consent management, which is a core part of the GDPR. that you just mentioned. And we were working with organizations who wished to ensure that they had the consent of the individuals whose personal data that they were transacting or had access to. So we were very much coming from the privacy world and dealing with the compliance with the GDPR, which is important. We also have something which has come out in Europe called the Data Governance Act, which is about data sharing. And there's a quote from a vice president of the European Commission I'd like to share with you, which is that data is not oil. Like we've heard for so long that data is oil.
Right.
She said data is not oil. It's a renewable resource that can be pooled, shared, and reused, which is really true. You can't do that with oil. You know, you get oil out of the ground, you burn it, you're done with it. So it's very much it's not oil. You can share it, reuse it multiple times. And the issue is making sure that you can secure that data and trust it and protect it from misuse and protect the individuals whose data it refers to from being duped, essentially, and empowering them to know what is happening with their data and give consent to the way that it's used, who's going to use it, and who shares it, and ultimately have some share in the monetization of data sharing, which at the moment is completely oblique to most people.
That is a huge issue. I actually know some other companies that are focusing on that space right now, blockchain companies. There's a company called CrowdPoint we've done some work with, and they're all focused on privacy and on finding ways to enable the sharing of information about buying preferences, for example, without revealing who it is. And so they have a digital twin, basically, which is an NFT, a non-fungible token. And in that token, all the buying preferences and history are stored about a particular individual, a distributor, a seller, or whatever. And then that floats around on this blockchain and is used to identify opportunities, but done so without revealing who you are, whose preferences those are. And it sounds like you're doing something similar. Is it based on blockchain, or what are some of the component parts under the hood?
The platform is based on Hyperledger, which is, as you know, I'm sure, a blockchain. It's open source blockchain, if you like. And we don't store data, but what we do and what we've developed recently are a set of data agreements. So that it's a suite of data exchange agreements, so that an organization has an agreement with a customer about the use of their data. And then there'd be another agreement which is then in place for sharing that data with a third party or multiple third parties. And we have a suite of them, and they're automated. So this is all in the plumbing because nobody wants to see all of this dirty stuff. We want to make it, we emphasize the ease of use. So a lot of this stuff is automated, but the good news is it's all auditable. So, which is why one of the reasons for using the Hyperledger, and it also means that it's scalable. It's all cloud-based.
Yeah. Well, and with these blockchain-enabled systems, and what's very interesting here is that you can do smart contracts, of course, and you can capture all of the details about the transactions and then choose to make that transparent or opaque, for example. But there's a lot of information to be gathered in doing so. And I kind of see this next generation of marketplaces evolving for data, but also for products and services and so forth that are outside of the Amazon world, let's say, and some of the other large platforms that have become very, very proficient at doing this kind of thing. But they are companies that you can, really control or influence because they're just huge multinational conglomerates, right? So it's interesting. This whole separate world seems to be rising up as almost a counterbalance to that. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's happened, some of the drivers for what's happening at the moment, as we see it, are obviously the regulations, particularly as they affect European companies and organizations, but also general market trends of people waking up post-pandemic or during the pandemic about their digital personas and digital dependencies, which have become particularly acute during the lockdown when people were spending so much more time online than they ever did previously.
Right.
So that is making a great deal of awareness of some of the practices that have been in place to date, and some of the activities of some of the larger companies. We won't mention any names. I know you just did, but keep it clean here.
Right.
But the whole trustworthiness and the savviness of individuals is transformed. For example, we're using Zoom this evening. 3 years ago, the overwhelming majority of people had no idea what Zoom was.
Right.
And now everybody is using it. Grandparents are talking to their grandchildren, and the pace of digital transformation, both in business and privately, has dramatically accelerated. And with that is a greater awareness of what the digital world is about and personal freedoms and what is happening to people's data. So there is a general backlash and lack of trustworthiness about corporate misuse of data.
And that's a very interesting point, and I'll just kind of throw it out there for the audience to soak up a little bit. But that sort of thing has a very profound impact on behavior, and trust. Of course, we know is something that is difficult to earn, easy to lose, very hard to earn back. But it's also difficult to really measure in any meaningful sort of way. So how do you measure for that kind of thing? How do you know the opportunity cost, for example, of not embracing a more private and governed communication platform for important data? It's a difficult thing to determine, but it is something maybe we can pick up in the roundtable discussion at the end of this show, because it strikes me as being very timely that we see so much discussion around ethics these days, ethics in data, ethics in AI. And the reason is because this is a significant turning point in business and how we do things. Never before have there been so many data points about individuals collated all around their persona, which can then be bought and sold and rented by other people to make decisions. I mean, it's crazy the amount of information that's out there. And most people really have no idea the depth to which this information is readily available. But folks, don't touch that bell. We'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
All right, folks, welcome back to DM Radio. We're talking all things sharing of data. Share and share alike. It's a thing. We heard from Michele Duigo in our first segment from ProcureDocs and David Goodman from a company called iGrant.io. And next up, we have Saket Sarab. He is the CEO of a company called Nexla, Nexla. Look those folks up online. I found them a few years ago and looked at the marketplace that they were building for data and was really impressed by what they had done by really opening the doors to sharing at scale for very useful information sets. And then, of course, they went and built a whole engine around that, which I just love. I love tracking the innovation of these companies. They start in one place and realize what they have, and they kind of build something else around that. And that's what the folks have done at Nexla. But Sarab, tell us a bit about Saket, tell us a bit about your company and what you're doing to enable sharing and analysis of data.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. So Nexla, we are based in San Mateo in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we're a company that's been at the forefront of this thought process about how data moves across companies and how it can be relevant and, in fact, sometimes necessary for solving various types of business needs. And two things brought us into this space. One was the understanding that as we build more intelligent systems, more machine learning, data is what feeds into that. And there is data that companies have in their own environment. And then there's data in their ecosystem that supplements that. So a good example being that I'm trying to improve my customer service, for example. So I have data for who visits my sites and do they look at products and all that stuff. But my customer support software has other insights or other pieces of data. So bringing things together is super powerful. The other thing that we also were clearly observing when starting Nextlab was that anytime two companies work together, it will become natural for data to flow between them. And a good example among one of the companies that uses us is we all get like groceries delivered, for example, at our home. Clearly, an Instacart has to know what stores have what products to even show it to us and then go pick it up and bring it over, right? So there's clearly a data flow happening between them and the merchants that they're supporting. Right. So there are many places where such data flow is essential for the services that we get. And we understood that there is a challenge in, bringing the data in, and there's a challenge in sending the data out. Right. So that's one part of that. We also understood that there's a lot of complexity in data. I mean, it's not just straightforward that you just take some data and just go use it. There's a lot of processing that has to happen, and which is what we call as data engineering. And the thinking in Nextlab and what you have seen as the evolution of the company has been to automate many of these aspects of engineering around data, so that can be, done in an easier process, right? People who understand data can do it. It can be done at scale and so on, right? So we are a technology platform that companies have been using to make such use cases possible.
Yeah, and you brought up a couple really good points there. I'd like to dive into one of them, which is you mentioned like your customer support data from those systems. And these days, think of how many systems you have. I mean, the MarTech world, we talk about all the time, the MarTech 8,000. Those are 8,000 different tools and technologies used for automating some part of the marketing and sales process. And they all have their own little view of the world. They all have their kernel, where they came from and where they kind of built out to. And there's a lot of overlap, obviously, between them. But the point is, whatever systems you have in place right now, they have some valuable data about your customers, your partners, your prospects, whatever the case may be. And to be able to quickly weave in some tidbits from those systems to get a complete view, or at least a more complete view, is really important and can really help solve challenges. And then, of course, what you really want to do is learn from that and then go upstream and maybe change some policies or change some fashion of how you're capturing, moving, analyzing data, what you're doing with it, optimize your business process. But that starts by getting a complete or a more complete view, right, Saket?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a lot of companies that are providing a product, whether they're providing a product to other businesses or whether they're providing a product to the consumer, each company is using hundreds and thousands of different other sub-services. You're using a CRM system, you're using a marketing system, you're using multiple inventory systems, you have supply chain, you have, all of that stuff. And what has happened is that companies have started to focus on their unique product value, which means they're using third parties to supplement those capabilities. Now, the application gets distributed, but suddenly to understand your business better, you have to bring all that in together, which is the data, which helps you understand how to run the business, right? So I feel like the data challenges have only increased over time for companies, but the end value for the consumer increases. So for example, when we go shop for products today at any website or e-commerce store, most likely they're not holding inventory. Most likely they are getting it from a third party. So there's data flow, and I think Michele, you talked about that portion a little bit, right? But so comes for every aspect of the business. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point too. And I keep thinking to myself, this is the information economy, and the more analysis you can get on relevant data to your business, the better off you're going to be. And I see this already happening. I see the email marketing tools that we use starting to infuse more data about the people in my list, showing me just automatically some of the top people who click, some of the top people open. That's just a little mini window into what's happening. What you really want to be able to do is then map that across multiple touch points and understand, hey, this person was on the website. He also called into the call center. When you can track that behavior across systems, that's when you're really getting somewhere around situational awareness. And that's so important to A, bolster your frontline workers, give them the information they need to make decisions right now, but also B, help the managers and help the senior directors kind of understand where things are moving and in some significant aggregate, because that's going to help you know where to go next with your business. It's such a volatile time right now to be in business, because we're seeing so many business processes streamlined and even collapsed. And that's what you want to do, is look at the workflow for whatever it is that you're doing. Let's say it's in retail, you're selling stuff, and to your point, they don't even have it in stock. They're just waiting to get it because they're optimizing that. I mean, Dell figured that out 15, 18 years ago in the making of computers. And now that knowledge has kind of spread to the rest of the world. But it's really powerful when you can weave together these more in-depth views of your world, right, Saket?
Yeah, in fact, as a consumer, I almost expect that. I call into a company, I sort of assume that they know a whole bunch of information so they can get me to the right solution right away. There's a question I just see in chat whether we are similar to some companies that give a 360 view of customers. Actually, we are not that, to be candid, right? The 360 view of a customer is created by companies that understand how to stitch different data together to create a single view of the customer, right? Our job is to deliver the data to such systems. So we are all about delivering data to the applications that actually go use it. And we don't actually build the final application. That is, what somebody does, whether they are, giving that customer view, whether they're a marketing tool, whether they're a delivery company, or, whether there are some customers in healthcare that do that. So across the board, that's what we do.
Yeah, in healthcare, boy, you want to talk about an area rife for innovation, especially around data. And that's actually a good segue. Maybe after this, I'll bring Michele back in and David. But you think about the importance of privacy as it relates to healthcare data and the criticality of knowing as much data as you can possibly get. I mean, think about different medicines you're taking and when it's contraindicated, things of that nature, to be able to make a diagnosis, for example. We've learned in the last few years just how crazy the world can get with healthcare scares like COVID. But geez, there's going to be so much benefit, I think, in the healthcare space by enabling the trusted sharing of information around individual patients and around population health too. That's the other thing too, is to understand now that we have the compute power, now that we have the data, we can really start diving into understanding macro trends like around the Pittsburgh area and in the whole Rust Belt. Really, multiple sclerosis is very prominent. Why is that? Is it because there's something in the water? Is it because of the steel mills over the years? Is it because there's not enough sunshine because it's cloudy all the time? These are all theories, but the point is you can start getting somewhere if you can get the data in and do some meaningful analysis, right, Saket?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll allude a little bit to some of the conversation we were having earlier, right? I mean, this data across companies can create extremely powerful use cases. And some extremely powerful sort of, aggregates, indicators of trends like we were talking about earlier, but also become something that creates a lot of responsibility for companies as far as governance, right? And the way we think about exchange of data, there are many parts to it, right? One is that, bringing the data, moving it around, the sort of thing that we do, right? But it is also like, what is the quality of that data? What is the governance of that data? How do I use it? And in many cases that we are seeing more so recently is how to make all that happen in more real time, rather than through what was more historically like, batches or processes. So some very interesting trends in that, in how exchange of data is evolving and also the marketplace part.
The closer to now you can get, the better. I'll throw it over to Michele. And I think Saket was even alluding to some process intelligence capabilities where you can detect. We're starting to see this in what's called observability now in the data world. We're starting to detect when some source of information either goes down or changes in nature of what it's delivering as alerts to go in and look and see and make sure everything's working properly.
Yeah.
But when I think about what you folks have done, what I get excited about is the process orientation and finding those those choke points or those control points where you can weave in data from other systems or deliver data to other systems. Those are what allow you to optimize and collapse those business processes, right? What do you think, Michele?
Yeah, definitely. Just it's going to benefit the customers a lot more when you can kind of weave in some additional data, find out where those choke points are. I mean, for us, if any of our systems are having errors, we're having problems writing certain data to another system, we're getting email notifications, we can flag when things don't jive between systems as well too, and notify our customers in real time to let them know that, hey, you have a problem with your data, you need to fix it so it can be imported or integrated into the other system.
Yeah, that's right. And you get the audit trail. I'll throw this over to David Goodman too. Audit trails are beautiful things. I mean, one of the nice aspects of cloud computing from my perspective is that the way I view it, we really have baked into cloud architectures so many of the best practices that we learned over years and years of on-prem data centers. Basic stuff like login, who logged in when, what did they touch, which system did they touch, what did they change? All that now is quite clearly available and readily available to auditors, to business people. So guess what? When someone does something inappropriate, you can find it. There it is. I have the record of that, right? You've got the receipts. That's a new trend all the kids are talking about, right? The receipts. You kept the receipts. But I think that's nothing but good news for all of us. Transparency is the best sunlight is the best disinfectant, I guess they say, and that's what transparency delivers. So I think that this movement that we're seeing, I'll go back to you, David, with these DApps and blockchain is very encouraging. But what do you think?
Yeah, it is encouraging, and it's really important. If there is a data breach, if data gets lost, somebody has to take responsibility for it, whoever it is. And if there is an audit trail of who has agreed to what and where the provenance of the data that one organization or one company has been using, then it makes it considerably easier. And it also puts a greater onus and responsibility on companies to look after the data that they have agreed to share. So the auditability is really important. I wanted to touch back on what you were saying about healthcare, because this is something that we've observed. You hit the nail on the head with this thing about the individual responsibility and not individual patient or person whose data maybe initially goes to the general practitioner who wants to share it with a hospital, they want to share it with a pharmacy, maybe a medical research unit. And if you can bind up all of the agreements to share, it speeds things up dramatically. I happened to be in hospital recently, and I filled in a whole load of forms asking me the same questions over and over again.
Oh, it's brutal.
I could almost, it's brutal. I can memorize my name and my date of birth now better than anybody. Staggering. But so that's one aspect of it. But the other one is doing the diagnostics on large data sets is really important. And one of the things that we found is that hospitals wishing to do an analysis using AI or whatever on big data sets aren't able to share that information with other hospitals because of security concerns. So there's a whole security dimension around data anonymization, secure multi-party computation,
that's
and
right.
so on and so forth.
That's exactly right. And that is a huge issue. We'll talk about that in the next roundtable, folks. Don't touch that. That will be right back. You were listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanagh.
Okay, folks, welcome back to DM Radio. We're talking all things data sharing today. Share and share alike. It's a thing. Great lineup of guests. We've been talking to Michele Duigo of ProcureDo, David Goodman of iGrant, and Saket Sarab of Nexla. And maybe, Saket, I'll throw this one over to you. We're talking about governance and the importance of governance. And I think about basic things like GDPR, of course, that's pretty critical. But governance should be something that all companies are striving for because it's indicative of responsibility, basically. So you have ways of baking policies in and dealing with access to information, for example, which is pretty important. But what are your thoughts on governance in this new age of big data that's everywhere? How do you get it done?
Yeah, I think, Eric, you're right on that governance is essential, right? Now, if you think about this, there's been a conversation about democratizing data. How can data be used better or more, easily within an organization? So that's one end of the need. The other end of the need is, yes, we want that, but we also want it to be governed, right? And I'm sure your listeners have heard about the concept of data mesh, something that is trying to bring those two worlds together, have data products, have governance around them. Now, governance, I would say, has a few flavors to it, right? First part is like, who should be able to see data, right? As an individual. So within an organization, a large company, a lot of data, who can see what? Then it becomes about how do you package for sensitive data, how do you package the non-sensitive aspects of data in a way that are available to people, which is like, sensitive information should be tokenized or masked or hidden or removed from the data before it can be now considered as a safe data to work with. And then it becomes the application part. We also talk about the consumer end of it, right? What data is being used at the end consumer? So for example, the end application is advertising. What data can be used or cannot be used? And that's where a lot of the governance from the aspect of, different government policies also comes into place, right? Which is, where does the data sit? Does the data move out of a certain country or region, right? What data is captured? Is that captured with the consent of the person or not? So there are different aspects of governance. A lot has been focused, I think, on the regulatory aspect of it, which is absolutely needed and necessary. But within the organization, also governance is a challenge. And one of the things we are striving for in helping companies, they need tools to do that. Is like, how can governance not slow you down? You can create data products that are safe. You can manage the access control, do that more quickly and easily. But then also go and look back at saying, where was certain data used? Was it the appropriate place to use it? And have the tools to manage that. In a large organization, I cannot state it enough. There is so much data and so much places, it's hard to track and keep up with.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. Maybe, David, I'll throw this back over to you. As we continue to move through this very significant transformation in data and how it's used, how it's captured, all the permissions around that kind of stuff. You're in this space of trying to enable responsible sharing of information. Where do you think this is all headed, and what are the headwinds? What's preventing a responsible future around data?
Getting companies to realize how important it is and the consequences of not paying sufficient attention to the privacy concerns of their customers and the security concerns. One of the things, I was thinking when Saket was talking was from a corporate point of view, what corporates need to do is put in place privacy programs, data privacy programs, which cover a multitude of different things that a DPO or a CPO needs to take a look at from a company-wide perspective. So, reasonable security, the regulations that are involved, knowing where the data assets are, where they're stored, who's got access to them, who shouldn't have access to them, because there is this concern about compliance, which is obviously important. But there is also major concerns about data breaches and what happens if you have a data breach. And a lot of people say it's not a matter of if you're going to have a data breach, it's when you have a data breach, and what do you do about it, and where do the responsibilities and where do the liabilities lie for a corporate, for the individuals responsible, if and when such things happen. So the governance can be looked at from multiple different dimensions, depending on where you're coming from. What we can do is enable people to share data responsibly, in compliance. We can't make people GDPR compliant, for example, because the transactions that we're talking about can be compliant, but there are so many other ways that a corporate can breach GDPR compliance. I'm not going to list them here, but there are so many ways that companies can get things wrong. But what we can ensure is that in the transaction of data, that it's done responsibly and it's auditable. And I think coming back to your initial question, which I seem to remember, companies are beginning to wake up to the fact that they have to do more than just tick boxes. Mm-hmm. And they have to take very proactive actions, both internally in the creation of their privacy programs and also in the way that they transact with other organizations and with their consumers, or in case of healthcare, with their patients concerning their data.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. And Michele Duigo, I'll throw it over to you for some closing comments here. Like I said before, what I get excited about in terms of what you folks are doing is the awareness around process and around the data lifecycle and the processes that are running these businesses, and you're giving a window into that environment. Because to Saket's point a minute ago, in large organizations, there is so much data, and there are so many, not just off-the-shelf systems, but homegrown systems. Those are even harder to audit and to understand because someone just hacked out a bunch of code to solve some problem sometime.
Yeah.
So you're giving this window into the processes, and I think that's very beneficial to help ensure integrity of the data and quality of the data and responsible use of it. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Going in, trying to integrate or send data into a hacked in system, we can kind of identify some of those areas that need to be improved and, kind of make it more cohesive with their other systems as well, too. So, it's the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. So when we start tying systems together, that's when people realize that in what they consider their Bible or source of the truth, that maybe it's not as clean as it should be. As soon as you start moving that, and especially if you're moving that to a B2B customer as well too, you want to make sure that that data is clean as well. So yeah, it kind of highlights the issues with data in that respect, that if it's not up to snuff or, duplicates, things like that.
Right. Duplicates, of course. That's actually a good point. And in our last minute or so, I'll throw it back over to Saket. They say in the open source world, many eyes make few of the errors in the code. Bad code will go away because so many people can see it. And I'm guessing, just real quick here, that the data exchange that you're running, the fact that you have multiple eyes coming in and looking at these data sets now, especially with collaborative capabilities, you can get to the truth faster. You can get someone who will say, hey, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this data. I've worked with this data before. There's something wrong with this column. That collaborative work around the data helps improve the quality. What do you think, Saket?
Yeah, I think absolutely. And one of the things that I'm excited about that is happening in the ecosystem in general is the concept of data mesh, thinking about data as a product, thinking about data that that is being produced by some entity, that is being consumed by other entities, that has governance around it. And one of the things that this is doing is helping people document what the data is, helping them discover it, helping them figure out how to use it. But all of these are very collaborative. So if things are documented, this is the column, this is what it does, this is where it has been used by these other use cases, then it becomes so much easier to find, what is the right one that I need as a data user, and what are the issues there? Yeah.
Yeah, that's so important. And we've seen a lot of innovation around that particular space in the last few years, frankly, around collaboration and around surfacing insights for your users to kind of help them. This is where AI comes in very handy. quite frankly, is just looking for patterns, noticing similarities between people, like in particular roles, and saying, to Bob, for example, you may be interested in this data set because Susan is interested in it as well, and you two seem to be doing the same thing all the time. Little stuff like that can be very helpful to help us not reinvent wheels all the time. Companies pay so much time and effort reinventing wheels. Governments do the same thing. The more we can share, the more we can collaborate, the better we can preen these processes and get them nice and tight. But folks, thanks so much for your time. Send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. You've been listening to DM Radio.
In the Know, I'm Andy Solomon.